Hey everybody, I do want to record a little bit here for the Stuff I Heard podcast. I need to adjust my camera a little bit. I'm going to angle you guys up a tad, that way you can see my face. I got the bright light on, obviously you can see it glaring off of everything. Sorry about that. Wearing the Boba Fett t-shirt. Shout out to the nerds the Nerds Who Get Laid Sometimes podcast. Thank you guys for the shout out. Thank you to the Old Red Truck, my brother and his wife doing a podcast. Appreciate that shout out for there as well. I'm going to try to record a live podcast using the anchor.fm website. Now, I've talked in the past about using their app, and I like their app, except for the fact of when you click on it, it opens up the app, and you can hit record, and you can swipe up, and you can blah, 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 blah. You can record, but if you get a phone call, then there's a problem. If you get a phone call, you lose your data. All that information is gone. And I've written them an email and I said, hey, can you please look into this? Maybe you can do like a block function so that phone calls don't lose your stuff. And they said, have you tried putting it on Do Not Disturb? Yeah, I tried that. Doesn't work. Have you tried doing, I've tried everything. Maybe there's a software thing that you guys can do. I'm looking forward to problem solving it because I like using the phone for that because it's so convenient. But anyway, I'm going to try it this way. The last one that I did, I know that well, let's just turn this on. Hold that thought. Alright, I want to show this. I went on the anchor.fm website. I've logged in. I went down here to record. I clicked record. It says record a new segment. I click segment, and it says input. Do you want to use a default internal microphone built in, or the one I have plugged in is this CAD. That's what this is. CAD. So I click this, and I hit start recording. So we're going to try this. This is my first time doing it this way. I tried doing this while I was visiting with my friends at the beach, and the minute I hit record, it said some little small print of this will not work if you're using anything other than Google or Firefox. I was using Safari at the time, and we had lost an entire hours-long episode because I wasn't paying attention. So we're going to start this off, and I'm going to hit start recording. Hello everybody, and welcome to the Stuff I Heard podcast. This is your host, Joshua Peak, and I want to thank everybody for checking in. I do want to give a special thank you to the Nerds Who Get Laid Sometimes podcast. I appreciate all the love you guys are sending me. I know you didn't mention my podcast, but still I know you guys are listening, and I appreciate it. Special shout out to Greg Steele for being a guest on the podcast the other day. I tried to do that in here in my office, and of course now the guy's cutting grass next door. I'm sorry if you hear the guy cutting grass next door. But anyway, what we did last week is I had this all set up in here with my camera and with the laptop and the microphone, and Greg had called me on speakerphone, and I was kind of holding my phone like this next to the microphone. And I went back and I listened to the episode, and by far that was the longest episode that I've recorded. It was a good hour and 43 minutes. The first 14 minutes and whatever seconds of it is me just jammering on about, you know, I'm going to have him on, we're going to try this and see if it works. I went back and listened to the audio, and the audio does have a bit of crackle to it, and I'm not exactly sure why there's crackle noise. Maybe somebody can write me and let me know what's going on with that. Maybe somebody with some more experience than I have. I'm not sure if it's from the static of the phone doing a speakerphone version of it, you know, maybe the hiss noise of the phone getting to the microphone is causing some kind of weird interaction or what. But maybe you guys know, maybe one of you can write me. You can reach me on the email at stuffiheardpodcast@gmail.com. I also have noticed that you can send me a message if you're using the Anchor app to listen to these. There is a function down there where you can send a voice message. There is also a function where you can write me, because I get messages from people on it. I don't exactly know how to write people, but I did listen to my brother and his wife's podcast today. They have a podcast called The Old Red Truck, and they're on episode 2. They're getting started. They're a young 30s family who are raising kids, and they're both educators, and they just got back from a trip taking their 5-year-old daughter to New York for the first time. She is a huge Frozen fan, and they took her up there to go on a trip to see the play, the musical. So very cool for them, and I'm getting ready to hang out with them this coming weekend. We are planning a big family vacation. We're going to go to Kiowa and visit with my mom, which we mentioned on the last podcast. My mom is a nurse practitioner and a trailblazer in her own field. She is fighting for nurses' rights and nurse practitioner rights. My stepdad's going to be there. He's an ear, nose, and throat specialist. He's a surgeon. He's a cool guy, but he's pretty quiet. He doesn't say a lot, but he's got that weird Midwestern kind of sense of humor. Very dry, very dull, but you know, when he's got a joke, he'll land the plane. Dan, if you're listening, I love you. And we're also going to hang out with my brother and his wife and their kids, and my stepbrother and his wife and their kids. Now, my kids, of course, are grown. I got 3 sons, a stepson who's 25, and my 2 are 23 and 21. They're sort of grownish. They've moved out of the house, and thank God. You realize as you're raising kids that at a certain point, God makes them teenagers, so you're not so sad when they leave. You're like, it's time for you to move out, buddy. You know, there's a certain thing about being a teenager where you get very, very irritating to your parents. Maybe it's because you think you know everything, you won't listen, or the fact that you're costing them more and more money and they can't wait for you to leave so that you can figure out how life really works, and that money doesn't grow on trees, and sometimes you can't do all the fun stuff you think you can because you have to grow up. And I had a long time ago where I was talking to somebody at work, and they said, when you get into your 20s, that's really a really tough time because you don't know who you are, and you want to tell everybody who you are, and you're still figuring it out. And she told me, she said, you know, the weird part is you're still figuring out when you're in your 30s. She's like, I'm in my 40s and I'm still figuring it out. And you just get better at it the older you get. The more you know what you're doing, the more you know where you stand and what you're willing to do and not do, the more you can kind of decide where you want your life to go. Now, here's the weird thing. Growing up, my friend Greg knew exactly what he wanted to do, and he went for it. He has somewhat of a photographic memory. If he reads something, he retains it. If he scans the item, he's got it. Like, it's knowledge. And that allowed him to do really well in school, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I had a form of dyslexia. When I read things, sometimes the letters get jumbled up. When I write, I have the same kind of problem. When I write, sometimes my W's get mixed up with M's, sometimes my B's become P's, or my D's become P's, or my D's become B's. Sometimes when I'm writing numbers, I'll have them in the wrong order. I did not know this was something that was somewhat normal. I just thought that I was a bad student. I thought, okay, well, I just don't pay attention. I used to get those letters home to mom saying, oh, your son is so bright, but if he would just apply himself, well, okay, sometimes you can't apply yourself enough because you don't know that you have a disorder. Needless to say, I didn't do great in school, but I did enough to pass, and I did enough to get into college, and I tried to go to college, and that just didn't work out. Now, I've talked before about my 20s, 30s, and 40s on another podcast, and you know, my 20s were more directed towards going in the military, having a young family that me and my first wife did not work out, raising kids and whatnot. And, you know, I remember being in my 20s, as my sons are right now, and they're trying to figure out life. Well, you would know I'd get a phone call today from my stepson who's 25, and he's in a relationship, and he has a son, and she has a daughter, and they're trying to make it work. They're trying to figure it out. They're trying to understand what it is they're supposed to do. And both of them are having a hard time. And it's tough. It really is, because, you know, he asked me, he said, how do you navigate it? How do you do what you're supposed to do as a man and have a relationship? And, you know, when you fight, how do you fight? How do you do it? And I said, well, first off, you have to understand who you are, and that takes living. That takes doing things, that takes putting up with things, that takes being in relationships where you go, okay, I don't like this, I'm not going to stand for that, but I will put up with this because that's tolerable. And somewhere along the way, you learn that, okay, maybe the way I communicate is not good. Maybe I need to learn to communicate better. So in that communication, I think it was after my divorce where I read a book, and I can't remember what it was called, but it said that you have to learn how to fight correctly. You have to learn to fight about the issue and not with each other. That sometimes you have a difference of opinion because you have different fears, different wants, different desires, different ways of looking at things. You're different people. You're supposed to have difference of opinion. You know, that book that came out, what was it, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus? It talks about how the minds of men think about, you know, see problem, fix problem, must fix problem. And women are very emotional, and they tie everything into emotion, and sometimes conversations are tied into emotion. And if you make a mistake, hey buddy, you've just tied into her brain all kinds of problems that are going to be there forever because you did something that caused her emotional suffering. There was another book I read called His Needs, Her Needs, How to Build, what is it? His Needs, Her Needs, How to Build an Affair-Proof Marriage. And in that book, it talked about how you have to look at your relationship as a bank. And you can choose to put things into that bank all the time. You make a deposit into that bank by showing your love and affection and being consistent and that kind of stuff. And if you withdraw from that bank, it's going to withdraw more than the units that you put in at times. So you have to be careful with that bank. And if you constantly live a life of thinking of, I need to continue to contribute to this love bank, then it'll come back to you, and it'll flourish, and your love will grow. If you deplete that love bank over and over again, it's going to become bankrupt, and so is your relationship. So, you know, I kind of gave him a little bit of this advice, but you know, some of what he's going through right now is his own fault. And I told him, I said, all right, first off, you have to realize her position, and you have to comfort her, and you have to tell her, you know, hey, you're important to me, and I'm sorry, and you know, and we're going to move forward. We're going to learn to communicate better. We're going to learn to help one another a little better. We're going to learn to, you know, put each other first. When you're raising kids, it really is about your relationship, because your relationship has to survive in order for you to help take care of these tiny humans who need you for everything. And they're going to learn from you. They're going to learn how to have an argument correctly by watching you. I don't think that my wife or I, either one, saw how to do that growing up. But we did learn what was not acceptable. And through our first marriages, we learned what we weren't going to put up with anymore. And we learned that there's a better way to communicate. We have worked on it for years. We have been married now over 13 years, and I think that we are in a better relationship now than we've ever been. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we communicate. You know, I told my stepson, I said, hey, you know, you've got to do the work. You've got to be consistent. When I was younger, I remember my friends wanting to do a bunch of stuff, and I said, I can't. I got things I got to do. And I had to put aside things that I enjoyed doing as a young man because it wasn't what fit my family needs. I remember specifically, I went to go see a Carolina football game, go Gamecocks, and I went to hang out with a buddy of mine, and we tailgated, and we had a good time. And the plan was that we were going to ride over to his aunt's place and spend the night over at his aunt's place. His aunt didn't live too far away. But somewhere during the night, he got an invitation to go hang out with a girl that he used to know. And this was a long time ago. I don't even remember how long ago it was. But he was going to go hang out with a girl that he used to know, and he was single at the time, and she was single at the time. And I thought, you know, hey, I could be this guy's wingman and maybe, you know, talk him up a little bit. So I was like, yeah, let's do that. So I went with him, and I talked him up, and I thought things were going great. And she kept wanting to hang out later and later and later, and I said, you know, we just can't. We gotta shut it down. And she was like, no, come on, hang out with us. At a certain point, I remember saying something like, I have to go because I have a job, and I have to be at home by a certain time. If I'm not home by a certain time, I can't do my job correctly. And she goes, just call in. I said, no, that's not what an adult does, and that's not what I'm doing. I have a job, and I have a family, and they depend on me. And because of that, I'm out of here. Now, there was a lot of things I could have done differently about that. I could have been a little more courteous to her, a little more softer in my speech. But I needed her to know that I was not going to put up with anything that was out of what I had planned. And what I had planned was to hang out with him for a certain amount of time. And at a certain amount of time, we were supposed to go back and go to sleep, because I had to get up the next day and I had to go back home and get ready for work. And it was fun to hang out with my friend, and it was fun to watch the game, and it was fun to drink and hang out and party and blah blah blah. And thank you to my wife for letting me to do that while she was watching the kids. I mean, she'll tell you, she's like, I don't mind you going out and hanging with your friends, it's fine, because she trusts me, because I don't give her any reason not to trust me. She knows that I'm all about her. I'm all about, this is a relationship, I'm with you, that's it, period. And because of that, you know, I was like, hey, I'm gonna do this, and she was like, oh, that sounds great, think you guys will have fun, y'all be safe, just make sure to get a sober ride. We're like, okay. And you know, now thank God there's Uber. Man, tell you what, Uber is awesome. But for him, you know, for my stepson, I was like, hey, listen, you know, you got to do the work, and sometimes you both need the work. When you're in your 20s, both of you still have a lot of insecurities, and both of you are still working through things from previous relationships where you don't trust the other person. And both of you still need to learn that if you start putting your lives in the right priority, things will work out. When you focus on your family, you turn off your devices, you stop looking at Snapchat and looking at your Twitter and whatever else, and you engage one another, and you engage your family, and you take care of your family, and you nurture your family, and you don't forget to tell the other person, thank you for what you do. Thank you for helping me. Thank you for doing all the stuff that I can't do because I am not here when you're here, or I'm not awake when you're awake. My family was interesting in the fact that I had to go to bed super early, so I had to because I had to get up super early to go to work. Now, my wife took on the burden of, well, okay, I'll make sure the kids get in bed on time, and I'll make sure that I take them to school the next day, and I'll make sure I pick them up the next day, and I'll make sure that they're fed and the showers are done. My wife did amazing things, superwoman type things, just to make sure that we stayed afloat, because she knew that I would do everything I could while I was at work to earn us money, to make sure that we had enough money to make it. There was a period of time where it just worked out for her schedule that she does that. And then on my days off, I would do what I could to help out. I would take them, I would pick them up, I would do whatever. I volunteered to cook on those days. And, you know, over the years, we just supported one another. And I continued to tell her all the time how much I appreciated the fact that I couldn't have done any of this without you. We couldn't have done any of this if we hadn't pulled together. You have to appreciate one another. Again, adding money into that love bank, adding money towards one another, adding appreciation. Do we fight? Sure, we fight about things. We have disagreements, but we disagree about the thing that we're disagreeing about. We don't belittle each other in the conversation. It's not like I don't like that because you're stupid. You know, you can't go down that road. It's not healthy for your relationship. It's not what you really intend to say anyway. You know, could one person be lazier than the other? Yeah, that's possible. My first relationship, my ex-wife was what I deemed to be lazy. But I could have handled it differently. If I'd have had the mental tools that I have now, she and I could have worked on the relationship a lot differently. But you're young, you're stupid, you say whatever impulsive thing comes on your mind because you're like, I don't even care, I just want to blow this up. And that was crappy. It was really crappy of me. But our whole relationship was kind of a crappy mess. Anyway, enough about that. I do want to talk about this podcast. Again, I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank everybody for chiming in. I would like to have some more guests on here. I talked to somebody recently about being on. He wanted to talk to me about some military stuff, and that would be great. I am interested in getting more involved with recording, doing this video, and doing the live version. Right now, if you're listening to this audio-wise, I am recording a video as well that will be up on YouTube, on the Stuff I Heard podcast YouTube page. I did figure out how to record, how to charge my battery this time. I'm sorry about the last time. But the video is available, and if you're curious what I look like, or the fact that I'm recording in my little office area, whatever, if that floats your boat. I did put a little bit about how I'm recording on the Anchor.fm website using their record button. I'm trying this out for the first time, so if this doesn't work, then I've wasted some time, but we're going to try it anyway to see if it works. I've listened to a few podcasts this week, since this the Stuff I Heard podcast. I listened to a few podcasts this week, and I'll run them down here on my list. I got my phone in my hand, and let's see here. Most recently, I did listen to The Old Red Truck. That's not available on iTunes just yet, because they've only got 2 episodes out, but it is available on Anchor, and I think it's on Twitch. But I have listened to, today, I listened to Bert Kreischer's The Bert Cast. He has an episode number 295 that came out last Wednesday. Nikki Glazer was a guest on his podcast. She came by the man cave and hung out with him. They came up in comedy. She's a little bit younger than him. She's sort of a junior class, I guess you'd say. They went on the road together. They did radio together years ago. She talks a lot openly about the fact that she had a problem with anorexia and with bulimia for a while, and she had a lot of doubt about herself and about her appearance, and she really struggled with who she was. And she talks about relationships that she's been in with different comedians, and she has a very interesting version of how to talk about this, because she's come out the other side of it a stronger woman. And right now, if you don't know who Nikki Glazer is, she has a special on Comedy Central, and she has a Sirius XM radio show on, I think she said Channel 95. It's something to do with Nikki Glazer. You can look her up on the internet. She's all over the internet. She's a very pretty girl, and she talks about how she's developing, or how Sarah Silverman was the first person she saw where she went, oh wow, I could do this. I could really do this. I mean, this is the girl who's kind of like me, and she's hilarious. And not that she's hilarious as a woman, quote unquote, as a lot of female comedians are called. She's a hilarious comedian. And Nikki's like, people telling me all the time that I'm hilarious. And a lot of her humor was drawn from the fact that she had these eating disorders, and when she was trying to go to college, and she didn't really know who she was, and she was feeling it out. And when people started telling her she was hilarious, she was like, okay, well, I'm gonna try and do stand-up. And she did stand-up, and it's done great. It's a very interesting interview. It's about 2 hours long. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the crap out of it. I've heard Bert talk about Nikki on a lot of different podcasts where they did radio together, and apparently they were recording an episode, and she was talking about giving a guy a blowjob, and they were like, whoa, you can't say that on the air. And she was like, what? And he's like, you can't say blowjob on the air. And she goes, okay, I know how to change it. And he's like, okay, do it again. So she's like, okay, so I'm with this guy, and I'm sucking his dick. And she's like, whoa, you can't say that. And it's like, it's hilarious just to hear it. But anyway, the other podcast I listened to was Bert puts out one on Fridays. It's called Open Tabs, and it's just him opening stuff on his computer about stuff that he's looked at over the past week. He's a comedian, he's on the road, and let's face it, when you're not with your family, you're like, I'm just curious about whatever. And so he's clicking on everything. He's looking at some of it's, he's looking at porn, which is kind of, I guess, typical for guys. He's looking at the boys, the Thai boys that were stuck in the cave, and apparently they are starting to save them. Today, I looked on the internet, and all 20 of them have been saved. Is it 20? Are there 20 of them? I'm not exactly sure. All the boys have been saved, and the coach has been saved. So, good job to the divers, the Navy SEALs guys, all of those guys. That was amazing. That was an amazing rescue. I don't know how they ended up in the cave to begin with. Anyway, but the Open Tabs thing is more of a stream of consciousness. He's hanging out with his, he has an audio engineer. That's sort of what I am right now. I'm a host and engineer because I'm doing all this crap myself. If you're watching the audio version of this, you can see me flailing my arms around. Anyway, they hang out and they talk about things that he's opened up on his computer, and it's pretty interesting. I don't know. I'm a huge Bert fan. I'd love to have him on the podcast. I'd love to be a guest on his podcast. I'd love to meet him more than just a meet and greet after a show. I got to meet him in Charlotte this past year. My brother and I went to see a show up in Charlotte, and it was awesome. I had such a good time. I also am listening to, where's the other one? I listened to the Nerds Who Get Laid Sometimes podcast to listen to their episode 223, podcast Gold Weight Silky as Iron. Yeah, it was pretty good. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the discussion about Spider-Man, and I enjoyed the stuff about the movies. And they put a thing on Facebook. They have a Facebook page, and they asked, what would you guys like to talk about? And I wrote them and asked them if anybody has watched the show Legion that was on FX. I have just found Legion by listening to a podcast that my wife is listening to. I don't even know what the name of the podcast is, but they were talking about this show Legion, about how beautiful it was and how the sound, the music that they used was really interesting, but that the way they filmed things was like using layer upon layer of filming tricks that made it so... Anyway, they were using these weird tricks to record things, and he said, everybody's got little tricks that they do with their camera. He goes, these guys, it's almost like they went, all right, what's every trick we have, and let's do them all at the same time. And I thought, all right, I'm a little interested in this. The show Legion is about a mutant, because it's got the X, like the X-Men kind of thing. It's a show about a mutant who's like a super mutant. He's super strong. He is schizophrenic, so he's in an insane asylum, and he has a parasite living inside of him that's also a super hero or villain. Not really sure. Not really sure if our main character is a hero or villain. That's the weird part. If you watch the show, please write me and tell me what you think about it. I am digging it. I've watched 2 seasons of it now on my Fire Stick, and I am into it. I mean, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, man. It is good. I also listened to Joe Rogan's podcast. Of course, I love Joe Rogan. Checked out the Joe Rogan Experience. Listened to episode 1140 from Wednesday. Joey Coco Diaz, Cuban-American stand-up comedian, was on there, and it was great. I love listening to Joey. I got to see Joey live in concert this past year. He was awesome. I saw him in Charlotte as well. And I saw Joe in Atlanta and loved it. This is the first year I've gone to see comedy, and I got to see my top 3. Joe, Joey, and Bert, and I loved every minute of it. Anyway, this episode was awesome. It never fails. They're hilarious. Joey's hilarious. Joey has a special coming up on Netflix. I'm not exactly sure of the date yet. He wasn't allowed to talk about it just yet. But if you see Joey Diaz come up on your feed on Netflix, go watch it. You're gonna love it. You've probably seen Joey Diaz in movies before. He's in Spider-Man. Remember the Spider-Man where they're on the train and like he's facing off against the bad guy, and this big, large fellow says, "You gotta go through me first." That's Joey Diaz. Joey Diaz is also on, you probably know him from the Longest Yard. Then the remake, not the original, of course, with Adam Sandler. He's the big fat guy that passes out, and they put the cheeseburger on his chest, and he's like, "Oh, thank God. Has it got cheese on it?" That's Joey. Now, Joey, at one time, has kind of a checkered past. He was into drugs. He sold coke. He once held a guy up with an Uzi. He was arrested. He did federal time for that. While he was in prison, he learned to emulate other people in the prison, and that began the start of his comedy. They would have like a talent night, and he would get up on stage and he would emulate everybody, and he made everybody laugh, and he realized, oh wait, there's something to this, and he got into comedy, and it's just taken off from there. Now, I love Joey. There's a lot of people that they listen to Joey and they're like, I don't know about this guy. I love him. I don't know what it is about him. I think it has to do with the roughness of his comedy and the way he talks about life, and the way he looks at life. And I grew up around people who were somewhat, how do you phrase it? Redneck mobsters, in a way. Is that, are we allowed to say redneck? Is that derogatory or is that endearing? I don't know. For me, it's endearing. These lovely people that I grew up with were sort of a dangerous crowd, and there's a certain pride in knowing that you're part of a dangerous crowd. And They were the people who raised me. They were the people who I got my sense of humor from. They were the people who made me appreciate when someone got their just due. And I don't know, there's something about Joey that triggers that type of mentality, that picture in my brain of, you know, hey, sometimes you live a tough life, and out of that tough life you get some comedy out of it. So anyway, I love Joey. Listen to that one. That one's great. I'm listening to right now episode 1137 with Duncan Trussell. Duncan Trussell is very sweet. He is how do I say this? He's a comedian. He is he's weird. He's very weird, but in a good way, in a fun weird, in a, you know, he's not gonna harm you kind of weird, but also weird to the level of you go, this dude is out there, man. But he's very insightful too. Like, he did a podcast once with Bert Kreischer where he talks about how, you know, Bert was depressed, and he's like, what do you got to be depressed about? He says, look on your table. And Bert had these books on the table. He goes, look, you got Ernest Hemingway just hanging out here in the room with you. When was the last time you opened that up and like got to hang out with Ernest? He's like, you have all these opportunities of things around you, and you just don't know it. You haven't realized it yet. And I thought that was a very interesting way of looking at things. You know, he's like, he said something once also. He said, what if we're actually all astronauts, and we're not actually human, but we're wearing these meat suits? And he's like, wouldn't that be weird? Like what if your death is actually you returning back to your home planet, and your birth is not really your birth, it's just your entry into this meat suit. And you know, a lot of it comes from psychedelics and from stoned mentality, but it's very interesting to hear that type of talk. I mean, it is a weird basis that's not what most people would consider normal, but I can appreciate it. Duncan, I appreciate you, dude. I like what you do. I think you're hilarious. I first heard Duncan on Pete Holmes' podcast. You Made It Weird with Pete Holmes. And Duncan was on there, and they were talking about transcendental meditation, and I was like, wait, what is TM? What is that? You know, and the more they talked about it, the more I thought, oh, it's kind of like meditating. It's kind of like, you know, having your at peace moment. In church, we talk about how you have a quiet moment with God, and it's similar in a lot of ways. You know, I am of the belief that a lot of religions are bombarded by things that we separate ourselves with, and we shouldn't be. We should be realizing that we are way more similar than we allow ourselves to be. I think that we separate ourselves due to biases and fear and for control, and it doesn't need to be that way. You know, you have one life, okay? You only have so much time here in this one life. What are you going to do with your time? Are you going to treat each other nicely? Are you going to help one another? Or are you going to hurt one another? You know, I quoted a thing that I saw as a meme this week. It was by a woman named Barbara Brown Taylor. She's an Episcopal Church priest. She was quoted saying, Jesus was not killed by atheism and anarchy. He was brought down by law and order, allied with religion, which is always a deadly mix. Beware of those who claim to know the mind of God and are prepared to use force if necessary to make others conform. Beware of those who could not tell God's will from their own. You know, when I was a kid, I used to think that my mom was wrong when she would say that she owed everything to God. I used to think, no, you don't. I've watched you suffer too hard to believe that God had anything to do with this. God was not present when you were out here working your tail off and putting yourself through school. And she would just say all the time, I'm so blessed. God has provided. God has done all of this for me. And I thought, no, you have done all this for you. And the older I got, I think I had this conversation with my son around Christmas time. I told him, I said, you know, the older I got, the more I realized she was right. Because there's a certain point where you give up your control and you say, I don't have control, I need help. And you pray. There's a reason why when you get to be old and you hear the song Amazing Grace, you can't help but get teary-eyed. because it is grace. It is God's grace that's allowed you to do these things. And it's God's grace that allowed her to do the things that she did, and to show her the way and to give her the support. And it's God's grace that's allowed me to live this life that I've lived, and to be able to find the woman that I'm married to, and to have these kids that I have. And it's God's grace that's given me a platform in my lifetime to be able to reach millions and millions of people out there with just the sound of my voice, or a camera, or the internet. And we all have that ability. We all have the ability to reach out to one another. We all have the ability to help one another. We all have the ability to step outside of our comfort zone and say, hey, how are you doing? It's good to see you. I want to help you. Is there any way I can help you? What do you need? Most of us don't do that. Most of us stick our face in our phone and we walk away. Or we look at the ground and we walk on past you. And we don't need to be that way. So, I'm going to wrap this up for now. I got carried away with a hour and 43 minute long one the last time, and I don't want to do that this time. I very easily could. It's a lot harder to do by yourself, you know. I asked my mom, I said, what is it with me where I can talk for 30 something minutes by myself? And she was like, it's a muscle, it's a gift. The more you exercise your gift, the more you can do it. This past Sunday I was at church and I was listening to our pastor speak, and if you haven't had a chance to check it out, I go to New Spring Church, and we have a website, newspring.cc. You can go online, you can watch live sermons, you can watch past sermons. They're all great. Dan Leanne is a Chinese-born Australian native who now lives in South Carolina, and he's learning the dialect, and it's interesting to hear him speak. But he's a very good public speaker. He's a very good pastor. He's a very good teaching pastor. But while I was listening to him speak this past Sunday, I kept thinking, this is a muscle that you've worked on. This is a talent that you've exercised over and over again. And, you know, you see it in churches sometimes where it starts off with the youth pastor who comes up on stage as a guest because the head pastor is on vacation or whatever. And the youth pastor always gets up there and he's full of energy and he's using his hands and he's talking about this and that. And he can't wait to jump around and get your attention because that's what he's used to with children. And then when he speaks in front of adults, it's like, okay, calm down there, Junior. But we still want the message, but just simmer down a little bit. I mean, unless you're in an Episcopalian or Presbyterian church and then you're like shouting and jumping around anyway. But I grew up Southern Baptist, so we're a little more sit in your seat and shut up kind of people. Now, I will tell you that New Spring is, from what I can tell, non-denominational. I don't think we're considered Baptists. And we do hoop and holler at times, and we have fun, and you know, it's a broad spectrum Christianity based church. You know, there's a lot of people doing this kind of stuff now. They're online and they're broadcasting, and they're like, hey, check us out, we'd love to have you be a part of us. And you know, we only get better together. I mean, all these phrases I've learned from the church. The biggest thing I get from them is the idea of you're not meant to do life alone, and you know, we are better together. So if you're out there and you're starting a podcast and you're trying to do the thing and you want to get some traction, you want me to give you a shout out, reach out, say hey, I'd like to give you a shout out. My brother's got his podcast, like I said, with his wife, The Old Red Truck. Check that out on Anchor, and I think Twitch. And if you get a chance, check out the Nerds You Get Laid Sometimes podcast. It's available on iTunes and a lot of other places. Check out Bert's podcast on the Bertcast. What is it? Duncan Trussell's got his own podcast, the Duncan Trussell Family Hour. Joe Rogan's podcast, the Joe Rogan Experience. I mean, there's lots of people out there trying to reach one another, and we're all doing our part. So, with that being said, I'm going to wrap this up. Appreciate every one of you. Take care. I'll have another one out this weekend. Boom, baby. I hit stop recording. I'll show you what it looks like. So I hit stop recording. Right now my little wheel is turning. So we'll figure out what to do here when the wheel is turning. It says July 10th. Just now. 36 minutes and 30 seconds. it's a little more unnerving when I'm looking at myself in the camera. This is hard to do when you're holding the camera. Or not holding the camera, but like, I've talked about this before, the video element of having the camera versus just talking into this is a lot different. When I'm talking into this, I can just blah, 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 and not even care what I'm doing or anything. When I have the camera, I'm conscious of the fact that I got to look at the camera, and it's sort of unnerving in a way. This little wheel is spinning. Hopefully I didn't lose it all. Fingers crossed. I'm gonna stop you guys till it finishes spinning. Okay, so the little wheel finally quit spinning, and now it looks like I have a 3-dot thing and a plus. This is a 3-dot thing. What does it say? Oh, it says download audio file or delete. I don't want to do either, so I'm gonna hit the plus, and it says it's over here. Do I hit save now? Save episode. Okay. Oh, here we go. Now I can punch in my stuff. Alright, so from here, let me adjust you guys so you can see. I'm gonna do episode 17, relationships, and shout outs. Alright, I just put contact information on there. Please rate, review, subscribe, share. And I'm going to hit publish episode. This episode is published and can be heard everywhere. Your podcast is available. Note that external platforms may take up to a few hours to show new episodes. Boom. Cool. So if I hit home, and it's got that there, it shows it on the bottom there. Awesome. Well, I call that a success. What do you think? I'm proud of the fact that this camera actually worked this time. It did shut off at about 26 minutes or so. I'm not exactly sure why it shut off. I do need to work on that. I got to get that thing adjusted. But I call that a success. Now, I shot all of this video using my Canon G7X Mark II, mainly because it has a screen that flips up and I can see myself, and I'm kind of looking at the screen even though you can see my eyes are looking up a little bit. This is where Casey Neistat would normally wear those sunglasses and be like, I don't know what you're talking about, man, everything's great, everything, you know, you just got to take action over intent. I love you, Casey. Thank you for inspiring me. I'm taking action over intent, buddy. Check it out. If you're checking out my YouTube page, say hey. I got nobody watching it. I got 1 view or 2 views on videos. I'm here all by myself. All by myself. And maybe my brother. I think my brother might be watching it. Thanks, Alex. Hey, this only grows by getting started, right? You gotta get started and keep going. So, take care, everybody.